All right, let's go over how to fill out the exclusive right to sell listing agreement with the seller. Now, obviously, you need to have this agreement in place before you do any work or marketing or put signage out for anybody. You probably know that from state law. But let's look first where we find it. Now, I prefer to have agents fill out forms from the MLS because when we get a form updated, a new version of the form, it's most it's posted more quickly to the MLS than practically anywhere else. We do have the option to fill it out from .loop. Sometimes it can take a week or two to get updated in .loop. So again, I like to fill out forms from the MLS. You don't have to, but I like it just because it ensures that I'm using the most current version. Now, in this case, I've pulled up the forms here and I'm looking for the exclusive right to sell. Now I can auto-populate forms up here, and this would be handy, for example, if I were filling out a whole bunch of forms, a couple of addenda, something like that, maybe a real estate purchase contract, two or three addenda that needed to be in there, then I could auto-populate everything. In this case, if I just put in my client's name and put in that, there's nothing else really that's going to come in. And we'll notice that it's here. If there are multiple forms, it's kind of nice because it fills it out on all of the forms. So this agreement is automatically between the company, and I do like that on the MLS. It automatically puts that in there. And of course, we need to put our own name in there, whoever the agent is. And then we've got, let me talk a little bit about the name of the seller. This is where we need to have done some work a little bit. So it's a good idea to check title beforehand. And this is not a full blown title report. In fact, a lot of times you can find a record of this home having been on the MLS, and you click the tax ID number and it shows you who currently is, according to the tax ID number, the owner of the property. You can request a quick report, a simple PR report from your title company, um, and that will show who the owners are. The reason this is important is because sometimes we're meeting with just John Smith, but it's actually in the name of John Smith and James Smith. Of course, we need both names there. Sometimes it's in the name of a trust, in which case we'll want to call ahead and prep our seller and say, hey, could you have a copy of the trust available to us so that we can make sure that everybody that needs to be signing according to the trust is signing. And some, let's say it's a trust with 6 different kids that have to sign. The family put it into a trust with all of the kids. 6 different people have to sign. Well, we should probably meet with all 6 of them. And so we might be wanting to do our listing presentation via Zoom, with 6 different people invited so that they can all participate. Anyways, it's good to know this information beforehand so that we've got the right information down there. Obviously, if it's like military and somebody needs a power of attorney, military usually trains their people really well when somebody is off on active duty. But then we're going to need to have everything filled out and signed with the power of attorney. Now, if you're not sure exactly what you're going to need, let's say it shows up in a trust or power of attorney or something like that, and you don't remember all the details from this training, remember one thing: your title company is your friend. You can always call up your title rep and say, hey, this is a trust. What would I need? And the title company will know exactly what you need because they're signing hundreds of these. This is what their job is, signing paperwork, right? So they're meeting with way more people than we do. So if you're not quite sure, you can call them up and they say, hey, we're going to need a copy of the trust. We're going to need a copy of the divorce decree or a copy of the death certificate or whatever. So if they need a copy of it in order to close, you're going to need a copy of it as well to make sure that all of the forms that you sign are done correctly. So the title company is your friend. If you have any question, who needs to go in the seller box here? All right. Now the term of the listing, again, these are all things that are negotiable. But here they're giving the company the exclusive right to sell, lease, or exchange property owned by the seller. And here we put in the property address. Salt Lake City, Utah. And I probably wouldn't abbreviate things, but for the sake of this training, I will, right? And then zip code, right? At the listing price and terms stated on the attached property data form, Now, again, the MLS data form is a separate form, but it's incorporated into this document. So we're going to want to have that ready to go as well. Now, one of the easiest ways to do that, in fact, I'm going to come up here and do a new tab so I can show you that data form really quickly, is I can go to listings, create a new listing. Again, I would base it's nice if I can base it off of an old MLS listing, and I don't want to get too far down the road with this and creating things that later I have to delete. But basically, I start a new listing, and let's see here. I don't, you, by the way, won't see all of these. This is something I see because I'm principal. So, all right. So let's say that I start a new listing here. Enter a title. Let's go sample. Okay. See if it'll let us start this listing here. For some reason, not letting me do it with that. Okay, well, anyways, back to our story. If I were able to start the listing, then up on the top, I can print out an unfinished listing. Okay, so in fact, let me move a screen here. Here's one that is unfinished for me right now. I can print the PDF right here. I could save it as unfinished. I can put in what information I have, and I can print out the PDF. Okay, so when I print out the PDF, what that is referring to is this MLS data form. So I can type out a lot of it so that as much information as I have, I can put in there. It's not my garbage handwriting. It'll look a little bit more professional, right? So that's the form that they're referring to there. And again, we need to have that ready with this because it's part of the required form. And they're all part of this contract, right? And that's where the price and terms are stated there, because there is no price and terms on the exclusive right to sell agreement. That's all in that other form, right? And the listing agreement is effective as of the date it is signed. It ends at 5 p.m. on the date that we put in here. Now, some agents don't read through that, and they'll click this, and because it automatically pulls up today, they just click that date. And what they've effectively done is right now it's 3:32 when I'm making this video, and it ends at 5 p.m. So effectively, I've got a listing agreement. If they sign it immediately, I've got a listing agreement that lasts for about an hour and a half, right? Obviously, that's not what we want. So what is the prescribed period of time? It completely depends. Again, this is all negotiable. I personally like 6 months for most listings. If it's a multi-million-dollar listing, I'm going to want to try to get at least a year. I'm putting a lot more time into it. I know that those listings, I'm not just more time, I'm putting more money into the marketing of it. I've got to pay extra for photos. And I know those listings typically will stay on the market for a longer period of time, right? So I like to do a little bit longer, but let's say we do 6 months, right? And I'm just going to go to August 26th for the sake of this story today. All right, then we jump down to the next section. Oh, and by the way, okay, we mutually agreed that the listing period shall automatically extend until the under contract transaction closes or is canceled. So let's say that we go under contract on August 25th, right? Now, while it's under contract to be sold, this listing period automatically extends until the transaction closes or is canceled. So if we go under contract on August 25th, I don't need to sign an extension to this the next day. It's automatically extended until it closes and I get my commission, or if it's canceled, then my agreement would, right? All right, let's move on to brokerage compensation. Now, some of this language in here is new as of the last few months, so I want to make sure that we go through this in detail. Even if you're an experienced agent, you probably want to pay attention because I get a lot of questions asked on a regular basis about this section here. So first of all, during the listing period, the company and the agent whoever locates or anyone else who locates a party who's ready, willing, and able to buy, lease, or exchange the property or any part thereof at the listing price and terms stated on the data form, again, we're referencing that form, or any other price and terms to which the seller may agree in writing, the seller has negotiated with and agrees to pay. And this negotiated with part is important because everything is negotiable, right? And agrees to pay to the company a brokerage fee in the amount of whatever commission you've negotiated for. Now, historically, we've seen a lot of 3%. I see some agents putting in 4%, some doing 2%. It's completely negotiable, up to you. And if you wanted to, you could charge an additional dollar amount. So, for example, at Equity, we have a transaction fee. I could put in here and say, look, I want to make 2%, but I want my full transaction fee covered. And I could put that in there as well. So it's 2% and this amount, right? And that is just what's coming to me. Again, in the olden days, from August of 2024, anything prior to that is the olden days. And what we used to do was we put in the commission that would come to me and that I would then be offering as well to a buyer's agent. So if we both wanted to make 3%, it would be 6% in here. Now this is just what I'm making as the listing agent, right? So then we go into section 2.2. Since I'm only getting paid this, since this is only addressing what I'm getting paid, again, with the older version, if it was 6%, if somebody came along that was unrepresented, I could get the full 6%, right? Because that's an extra hassle that I've got to put up with. I've got to nurture an unrepresented buyer through this entire process, helping them get through the inspections. I'm going extra trips to open the doors for them, for their inspector, for whoever, right? I'm working a lot harder, and there is a little bit of extra risk associated with that, even though I'm going to, of course, use the unrepresented buyer disclosure form. There is still an element of risk there of them getting upset and trying to sue me, right? So if the buyer is not represented by the brokerage, they're using an unrepresented buyer disclosure form, the seller and the company agree that the company may have additional liability and responsibilities in the transaction, and I'm going to charge an extra 1% more if that's the case, right? So if that were the case, still my client's getting a great deal for a total of 3%. I'm representing everything. Now, again, let's say that I want to charge 4% up here. I can negotiate that as well. So then we drop down to section 2.3. Now, the company is authorized to advertise or otherwise communicate that the seller and or the company is offering to pay compensation to a buyer's brokerage in the amount of, now I like to leave this blank, all right? So I'm not going to put anything in here. In fact, I don't like blanks sometimes, so maybe I'll just put NA. And then I'm going to check this box right here. If no amount is entered, then the company is not authorized to advertise or otherwise communicate that the seller and or the company is offering to pay compensation to a buyer's brokerage. Unless checked below, the company may enter a written compensation agreement. So I do want to check this, that the seller does not, let me highlight it, does not authorize the company to enter into a written compensation agreement. So what they're referring to is a separate brokerage compensation agreement here, and I don't want to do that. Here's the reason. And again, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I do want you to have a very in-depth understanding of this form as part of this training program. So the reason we don't do this is because there are some companies, whether they're not quite as educated about the settlement agreement, or sometimes they're educated, their attorneys just disagree. Almost every attorney I know, there's one holdout that still thinks that it's okay to, for example, a buyer's agent meets with their client, communicates the value. Maybe they're not very good at communicating it, so they put 1% in the buyer agency agreement. Then they call me up and say, how much are you offering as a buyer agent compensation? If I say 3%, then again, I don't agree with this strategy. Most attorneys say that it's not a viable strategy, that it wouldn't hold up in court. Then this buyer's agent could go back to their buyer client and say, hey, on this property, they're offering 3%. We have a 1% agreement. So let's add an addendum to our agreement, increasing it to 3%. And the reason most attorneys agree that that's not cool is because they're not offering any extra services, right? They're not necessarily putting their client's fiduciary duty first. Now, if they went back to their client and said, hey, they're offering 3%, we can increase our fees and then I can contribute 2% back towards your closing costs, then yeah, maybe they are putting their fiduciary duty first, putting their client first, and that would stand up in court. Either way, if I'm the listing agent, it's not good for me to communicate that 3% because the purchase contract limits their commission to the amount that they have in their buyer agency agreement. They can't collect any more than that. So if I tell them 3 and they run back to their clients and add an addendum, whether it's benefiting the client and would possibly hold up in court or not benefiting the client, they may get sued later on down the road for that money back. Either way, it's bad for my seller because I could have gotten away with just offering a 1% buyer agent commission because it's negotiated in the purchase contract, which again caps the buyer's agent in collecting any more than what they have in their buyer agency agreement. So for me, I don't want to communicate an amount. So I just let people know if a buyer's agent calls me and says, how much are you offering? I say, you know what, in section 2.3, they didn't authorize me to do a separate compensation agreement. So just bring us your offer and put in the amount that you have in your buyer agency agreement. Done. Super simple, potentially saves my client a lot of money, right? So section 2.4, the brokerage fee, unless otherwise agreed in writing by the seller and the buyer, shall be due and payable from the seller's proceeds if a purchase on the date of the record. So basically the closing date. If it's a lease, the effective date of the lease. If it's an option, then the date consideration for the option is paid, right? If within the listing period, and by the way, sometimes with an option, I'm getting a little bit again in the weeds, but sometimes with an option, they haven't collected enough money up front with the option to pay everything up front, even though by contract that's when it's due. Sometimes we negotiate and most of the money comes at the closing. So worst case scenario, we collect everything when the option is exercised. And that's worst case because a lot of times with a lease with an option to purchase, they never exercise that option. So you've done all this work and you never get paid. So that would be worst case scenarios, waiting till the option is actually exercised and they close on the home. Best case scenario for the agent is there's enough option money, and for the sellers, there's enough option money collected up front that they have, it offsets the seller's risk and they have time, or they have enough to pay their agent according to this contract. Sometimes we'll split it and we'll agree in an addendum that we'll collect half up front now and half later, or 2/3 up front, 1/3 later. Of course, that is negotiable, right? So if within the listing period or any extension of the listing period, the company is withdrawn from the sale, transferred, conveyed, leased, rented, or made unmarketable by a voluntary act of the seller without the written consent agreement of the company, or if the seller was prevented by default of the seller, then we could still collect a brokerage fee, right? Now, again, this means we're suing our clients, which most of the time we don't want to do. That's not great business. But sometimes the client does something that is pretty questionable ethically. They're really just trying to screw somebody. And then in that case, I do fight for my agents, right? Brokerage fees are fully negotiable and are not set by law. This is the big bold language that have added to everything pretty much since that settlement back in August of 24. Now, a protection period. Again, this basically says if the property is acquired by any party to whom the property was offered or shown by the company. So if the property is acquired by anybody that was shown the property during the term, right up here, during the term of our listing agreement, then we still get paid. So let's say, for example, that on August 29th, somebody that saw it last week comes and they write an offer. If I put in a couple of months in here, then that person saw it while it was listed with us, then we're still going to be involved and the seller agrees to pay the brokerage fee. Unless our agreement ended on August 26th. On August 27th, they signed an agreement with a different brokerage, now they're obligated to pay a brokerage fee to another brokerage based on a new listing agreement entered into after ours. So I could put a 2-month agreement in here, but if they sign a new agreement with a different brokerage the next day, then effectively my protection period lasted 1 day. And we don't want to set up a scenario where 2 different brokerages are suing a seller for a commission. That's what they're trying to avoid with that last sentence there. All right, in the next section, the seller warranties and disclosures, several different things here. I recommend, I'm not going to get in and read everything for you. I do recommend, in fact, if I could mandate it, I would. You're self-employed, so I can't. But I would recommend highly that you get in and read everything through in detail so that you know exactly what it says. All right. So there's some important language there. And again, it reviews here the duties of the seller's agent, the duties of a limited agent, which is legal in Utah. That's where you're representing the buyer and the seller. And of course, if a limited agency situation were to come up, then we go back here to section 2 where it talks about compensation. And it doesn't address limited agency at all. Again, in the olden days, if we had 6% here with 3% set aside for the listing agent, 3% set aside for a buyer's agent, that covers limited agency. It no longer does. And so because we checked this box that we're not doing a separate compensation agreement with anybody, basically if I come along and I'm also representing the buyer in a limited agency situation, then I'm going to need to negotiate that buyer commission for myself in the purchase contract as well. All right. So that is a little bit of a twist that these new changes put in place. Now, professional advice, again, if you're somebody that has multiple licenses, maybe you've got your mortgage license as well, you can only wear one hat. Now, sometimes mortgage lenders come to me and say, hey, we just got this news that we can do real estate and mortgage lending at the same time. You cannot in Utah because it's against the law. So even if the lenders come down and say, yes, you can, state law says, no, you can't. All right. You can wear one hat on one transaction. So in this case, we're giving professional advice as a real estate agent. And of course, you can read through the rest of this on your own. Now, dispute resolution. Do we do shall or may? I used to always do shall because I thought it's always better to mediate, right? Now, it typically is better to mediate than go to court. However, some people will play games with this. And rather than being able to go to court, they say, no, we need to mediate first, but this date doesn't work for me and this date doesn't work for me. And pretty soon we're 6 months down the road. We're very frustrated. Our clients are frustrated. We go to court and they hold this up in front of the judge and say, oops, they checked shall. We shouldn't even be here. We need to mediate. And we say, hey, we've been trying to mediate for 6 months. Then the judge says, okay, you have to have a date within the next 30 days set. And again, they can play a lot of games with this. So for me, with the experience that I've had in court, I like to put may at the option of the parties. Okay. So we try to mediate first. It's better for everybody. But if somebody wants to play games, we can skip that and go right to court. Again, I'm not going to read through all of these different things. I expect you to do that. Let's show you how to fill it out, though. So this one allows us to do a few things, right? First of all, we need to disclose to the MLS after closing the final terms of the sales price. And this is private information. The MLS is not public record. And so this helps other real estate agents. It helps appraisers. There's a lot of things this helps. Now, state law requires that we disclose where we got our square footage from. Now, it could be from the county records. It could be from an old appraisal that they had. It could be from building plans, or it could be even a previous MLS listing, as it often is. But it should never be you going out and measuring things yourself. Okay. If you're not sure, even if you've checked the MLS and there's different MLS measurements out there, maybe it was listed 3 or 4 times and they're all different, you can always hire an appraiser. It's not very expensive to hire an appraiser just to do measurements. They're not giving you an assessment of value. They'll charge a lot more for that. But just to do measurements, $50 to $100 is what I'm hearing from most appraisers. All right. So pretty simple to do, and you could get that information there. but you're never going to go out and just measure yourself. That puts a lot of liability on you, and we don't want that. Okay. This allows you to get information from a lender or something uh, that might be holding a lien or have an interest on the property. It allows us to get keys to the property. Again, you can read through the rest of this stuff. It allows us to order a preliminary title report, which we should be doing right up front, because again, we want to make sure that the people that we've signed the agreement with are the record owners of the property. Again, all of these things allow us to basically do our work on the property. Okay. Talks about personal property here and whether or not there's an attachment. And there may be an attachment, there may not be. So check the box accordingly. Usually an attachment would be an addendum clarifying a few things. For example, maybe this was a for sale by owner. They've got a couple of people that were interested in the property and they want to sign with me, but they want to exclude these other people because these people may buy. And if they do buy, then they don't want me involved. Or maybe they do want me involved, but at a reduced fee just to assist with the paperwork. So those types of things I could put in an addendum to this agreement, right? Now, if my seller is not a foreign person, right, as it's described here, then the seller I check is not a foreign person. If they are, then I check is. And again, read through the details of that. We don't discriminate based on protected categories. This is the entire agreement. And again, if we go down here, the entire agreement includes the seller's disclosures, which we need, the MLS data form, which we've already talked about, a wire fraud alert disclosure, and any addenda, as we just talked about. Okay, so all of those things are a part of this agreement. They all need to be filled out. So hopefully this was helpful to you. And if you have any questions, again, make sure that you read through in detail all of these things so that you can correctly advise your clients.